Hey, welcome everybody to the City of Lake Forest Park City Council Committee of the Whole meeting for Monday, June 22nd, 2026. It's good to see you. All right, I guess basically the first thing we'll do is have public comments. So I think KC, you wanted to give a comment? Okay. Oh, come on over to the microphone. Yeah. Yep. Oh, okay. I'm going to raise this so it's closer to where you're sitting. That's good. Okay.
Yes, my name's Casey Chen, initials KC. I have different names for different languages. Anyway, I recently retired from University of Washington. I'm a licensed structural engineer. Uh, there are many things to do at UW. It's like a city of 100,000 people. One of the item I have done once a year is give them a post-earthquake training to inspect the buildings because we only have so many structural engineers in the whole state, especially this, we're all on the West Coast. So let's say, for example, in this Quali earthquake, I was working as a consultant. Next day, I went to the city of Kent. It was raining where they're all waiting outside for the structural engineer to look at the building. If it's safe, they can go in. So I don't know what Lake Forest Park decision to do you want to look at before people can use a building? So if building safe, we put green tapes around it. If it's yellow, means certain area is unsafe. You shouldn't use the entrance or somewhere. Red means you should not use it. Okay. Hopefully the decision is correct because there's always post-earthquake, another one. And earthquake like New Zealand, Kobe, Japan, Christchurch in New Zealand, is another one, Perugia, I think, in Italy. The second one's even bigger sometimes. And there's potential, we have a fire station, I know, and that's essential. You need to check that. And this one, yes, you want to come in and work, you want to make sure it's safe. So anyway, I just want to volunteer and because I'm retired and I can give some employees a training how you check this building out, see if it's safe, then you come in. Otherwise, you want to contract a structural engineer, you may have to wait. I don't know who's available. 'Cause look at how many hospitals and bridges we have. Those are priority stuff. You have any question for me? No?
Well, as a geologist, I thank you for your concern. I appreciate it very much. And I think somebody on staff will get back to you if you leave your contact information with them.
All right.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much for your comment.
You're welcome.
All right. All right. Is there anybody else here who would like to give a public comment?
For the record, there are no other members of the public in council chambers.
I just want to face, I just want to cover all my bases. Okay, all right. Moving on then. We have three agenda items. Um, we first have the overview of the Open Public Meeting Act, possible updates to the governance manual, and I think this is Attorney Pratt's.
Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen. I've got about 8 slides to go through. And really this is OPMA and serial meetings. I was given a couple scenarios from Council Chair Furtani, and so we will go through those scenarios at the end, and at the beginning, we'll just set out the basics. What's a serial meeting? What do we have to look for? So what is a serial meeting? What can we not do? It always requires a majority of council. It occurs when a majority has a series of smaller gatherings or communications that result in the majority taking action under the OPMA. There does have to be an intent, a collective intent to meet. in addition to the communications. And you would think that that's hard probably to prove a collective intent. Um, Sometimes it is. There's usually more, I would say, actions that sort of make people wonder, did they meet without being in public? Like, there's a case where council members just at a meeting suddenly say, well, we're all in favor of this resolution for this action, which obviously made people think, how did they all come to this conclusion, in this open public meeting? So it's usually something like that, but I would say, I never want one or two of our council members to have to testify or be deposed about what their intent was when they got on a certain meeting or talked on a certain phone call. So it's always good to look out and see, do we have a majority here? Are we going to be having a meeting? Good news is mere passive receipt of information by itself is not a violation of the OPMA. It's not an action under the OPMA. So we have to have a meeting plus action. Definition of meeting isn't very helpful, meeting at which action is taken. But the definitions of action in the OPMA are, and some of the things that a council might do are very kind of benign. You might just be discussing a city, issue or considering it, reviewing it. That's considered action. So we have to watch out for a majority there. Three, an important number, gathering that includes less than a majority of the governing body is generally not a majority, so doesn't violate the OPMA. In your governance manual, though, council does have the Budget and Finance Committee, which is a council of three or a committee of three, and it is subject to the OPMA and all its noticing requirements. I would say that is the general rule for most cities, that council committees are subject to OPMA. Recently, you guys have changed it so that your ad hoc council committees are not subject to OPMA, but they would be subject to public records request requirements. So we need to be aware of that and making sure the city clerk has the documents that any ad hoc committee is considering. And the meetings can take the form from any sort of communication. I think that's easier for us to understand these days than it used to be in the past, but it can be, uh, text, emails, um, notes being passed. In the past, that was kind of difficult for people to understand. Wait, we weren't all sitting in the same room, we weren't communicating, but it can be any form of medium. So the test applied by a judge is going to be, did the majority of the council meet? Was there a collective intent to transact official business? And during the meeting, did council take action? So serial scenario 1 from Council Chair Furtoni. A constituent sends an email message to the whole council, plus the mayor, various city staff. We do not have any violation of the OPMA. No action was taken by council members. There's no meeting going on. This was all just passive receipt of an email. But then Councilmember Smith responds substantively using reply all to the constituent's message. I think then we do have a possible intent by that council member to discuss in a meeting of a quorum of the council members some topic of city business. We still have 6 council members who are passive recipients, though, so I don't think we have any violation there of OPMA. Councilmember Furtani keeps making it harder. Can Councilmember Jones send a reply all response to Councilmember Smith's message and still comply with the OPMA? I would say at this point, the best practice is not to send the reply all response. There is already a possible intent for a council discussion. We definitely have a quorum of council members. You do still have 5 council members who are passive recipients, but my recommendation would be anytime in this type of string of email, council should really, as quickly as they can, disengage from the email string. If a follow-up is needed, It might be, a job for the council chair or the mayor, the city administrator, and they can determine what are the next steps rather than council getting close to somebody saying, hey, you're having a serial meeting here. And then can another council member at this point send a message to only the original constituent without violating the OPMA? And yes, you can. We have no quorum then. It's just you and your constituent. There's no meeting. And so that can certainly be done. Serial scenario 2, Councilmember Smith responds to a post on a public social media platform. No violation of OPMA. There's no quorum here. No action of the council. No meeting. Can Councilmember Jones post a response to Councilmember Smith's message and still comply with the OPMA? Yes, we would still only have 2 council members. No quorum, so there's no meeting of council. An experience in the past would make me caution council, though, to consider sometimes those posts can get really long with all the replies. And you need to be very careful of making sure how many council members have responded to this and making sure you're under a quorum. I would say well under a quorum would be best if you post a response to something like that. Just be very careful about who on council has already responded. And then can another council member send a private message to the original poster without violating the OPMA? And yes, again, you can always do that. No quorum, no action, no meeting. So these scenarios, Councilmember Furutani was pretty nice to me, but they can get, kind of complicated. So I would say, in real life, always just consider, am I reaching out and somehow now I have a quorum of council in this discussion? Did I meet with 3 people in a committee meeting and now I'm reaching out to a 4th and asking her what she thinks about what the committee is planning? So just be very cognizant of, do I have a majority of council in on this net now? Is our intent to see if I have a majority before I make a motion at a council meeting? What is my intent here? And then even discussing it is action. Just remember that even discussing city business is going to be considered an action. So it's not a vote, just talking about it. So those are the 3 things I would keep in mind. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Attorney Pratt. And I'm seeing a hand up, so we'll start with Councilmember Riddle and then Vice Chair Goldman.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Can.
Thank you very much. The 2 items that kind of come up somewhat frequently is scheduling emails, because sometimes it's nice to reply all so you can see what everyone else's sort of availability is. If it's limited to just when you're available, is that still a serial meeting? Or is that it's just discussing scheduling as long as it doesn't talk about any other business? How do you feel about that?
I think you have to be careful what's on the email, what city business is included in the emails. It's probably okay. It would be better if one person coordinated it or one person on staff coordinated the meeting. But that's not really that's not a substantive discussion of city business. I just worry about, I'm sure I'm the only person in the world who does this, but sometime I'm on the email and I hit the wrong button and now I have responded to an email that was about scheduling and I responded with substance and I didn't mean to. So I would be careful and not do it if you don't have to.
And then the second, if I have another moment, in social media comments, sometimes I approach it from a factual basis. Oh, you can go here on the website to find that answer. Um, is that still substantive city business?
Yeah,
Or, okay, just checking.
it is. Yes, that would be, you're talking about the city business, even though you're being helpful and trying to point them to facts and things. It's still a discussion of city business. Yes.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah.
All right, so Councilmember Goldman, and then Councilmember Rosno.
Yeah, mine's also about scheduling. And so let's say there's a subcommittee of three that are working on a proposal, but then they want to come to Tracy and I to say, hey, can we put it on the August cow? Is that still considered safe scheduling? You know, because at some point they need to come to leadership to get it on a business meeting agenda.
Yeah, I would have one of those people come to the two of you. Can we get this on the agenda? And I would say not discuss when you're just scheduling, make sure it's just scheduling, not we want to put this on the council agenda because XYZ and we voted ABC. You know, keep it very specific to just scheduling. And if it could be just one of them reaching out to you, we, avoid the appearance of even having five council members looking at it.
Okay, thanks.
All right, Councilmember Rosano, then Councilmember Muhlenberg.
Hi. My on those subcommittee questions, you were saying that it's important for any documents that the subcommittees generate to be accessible. Does it suffice for them to be on the shared drive, or should we be including, if there's a document that's shared to multiple people, should that also be explicitly shared to Matt, for instance? McLean, not.
If the city clerk has access to it, then that's good because when he gets the public records request and does the search, that document will come up. As long as you're keeping them in some organized fashion that he does when he does the search, the document comes up, meeting of August 15th of this committee. And then if someone asks him for those documents, he'll be able to find them. So keeping things organized so that a logical search for them and they can be found is a good way to do it. We could definitely ask the city clerk if this is a regular subcommittee, if he would prefer that documents be sent to him so that he can keep them in an organized fashion. Like he gets agendas, etc., from other subcommittees. Does that answer your question, Josh? Or
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I've been, if I was circulating a memo or a draft of something, I've just been making sure that it's stored on that shared drive so that if someone did a text search, it would turn up or I could
Yeah.
point them in the right direction. And so that suffices. I don't need to be explicitly sharing it to the city clerk.
No,
It's
not
on the shared
unless
drive. It's accessible.
it's accessible, unless, the city clerk asks a particular subcommittee to start sending him their agendas and documents.
Okay.
Yeah,
That
I
makes
think you're
sense.
good keeping them on the shared information.
All right, Councilmember Muhlenberg.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I I have confusion from your guidance,
Okay.
Attorney Pratt, because you talked about the budget committee, and because it's a committee of three, what I heard you imply is we've created an expectation at the city level that groups of three and others are still going to comply with the OPMA.
Just that committee, just that subcommittee of three.
Just that, so the other subcommittees of three, which are typically formed to gather the ideas that exist around a topic. We don't need to notice those meetings. We don't need to keep minutes for those meetings. But if we have printed documents of those meetings, we need to retain those.
That was the decision made in 2026, a change to the Gov manual, to council's Gov manual that says ad hoc committees aren't subject to the OPMA as long as they're just advisory committees, which that's what you usually use ad hoc committees for. So those have been specifically by your Gov manual excluded from the OPMA, which you can do because it's less than a quorum. So the notice of those meetings don't have to, the public doesn't have to receive notice of those meetings and don't have to have the ability to attend.
Sorry for the follow-up question, if I may, Deputy Mayor. So that implies that even though those subcommittees comply with OPMA both factually and legally prior to us inserting it in the governance manual, that somehow by putting that call out in the governance manual, we've changed the level of expectation as it relates to those committee meetings? Would we
No.
be better had we not put that in the governance manual?
Um, it's It confused me a few weeks ago just because it was a change. But when I went back and reviewed, I was asked about that change and could you do it? And you can. And I said, yes, you can. So if a committee is under three, it is not automatically subject to the OPMA. It's not. As long as it's advisory, it's not taking on some role of counsel, it's not holding a public hearing, it's not taking testimony. So you can do that. It's a it was a change that was made in January. So it doesn't really imply anything other than it's a change. And so I think we have to think of, well, what processes need to go in place with this change? Um, if there is a written agenda for the meeting, it does need to be kept in an accessible place. Matt isn't automatically, the city clerk isn't automatically going to have it because it's an OPMA meeting. Are there minutes from the meeting? Those kind of things. What documents were shared? Making sure they're not just on personal drives. They're on the shared drive. So it's just kind of, I think, new processes for us all. Does that
Okay.
help?
I have further follow-on questions, but I want to be respectful of the rules of order.
Okay, well, I appreciate that, council member. And I guess this is the second round, so council member Rosenau.
You just mentioned, and I noticed this before also, the testimony. And I wonder, I mean, it may not matter, but we've talked about doing these, coffee with the council or other sorts of things. At what point does something, and which I guess the talk was to notice those in any event, but at what point does just like having a conversation with someone cross into taking testimony?
Okay. As long
That
as
may
you
be too
don't.
much in the weeds, and I'm happy to.
No, 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 no. I think it's a good question. Don't put them under oath. Then we don't have testimony and you're good.
Okay, I
Um,
wasn't planning to.
yeah, I
I
didn't
mean,
think you
people should
would.
be honest, but
Yeah, right, right. No, don't put them under oath. And no one at that coffee round is going to be saying, all right, I'm opening the public hearing and we'll take your testimony now. So those coffee meetings won't be taking on a role of the city council. They will, if anything, be advisory and if there is a chance that, a majority of you are going to show up, yeah, they should be noticed as public meetings. But just talking to your constituents, not not something you're taking over from council.
makes sense. Thank you.
And Councilmember Muhlenberg, you had a further question.
I did. I go back to the guidance Attorney Pratt has provided, and I think about work product and draft work and the things that we are, allowed to do in the role that we serve as council members. And I think about committees as three in that same context as draft work or work product uh, and so I get confused by the idea that any notes or minutes or documentation that might be created in those events where we're doing draft work or pre-thinking, why those would be things we need to file with the clerk so that they become discoverable and part of, because my draft work in other places isn't filed with or discoverable as part of an OPMA related request.
You mean they're not discoverable as a public record?
Yeah.
Okay. I think it would be at a certain point, a committee's work is probably going to create a draft that might be subject to a public records request. Um, it might turn into the document that council adopts, and therefore it would be subject to a public records request. So if those drafts are saved on the share drive, then the city clerk will have that if asked for all drafts of the Budget and Finance Committee for the budget, you know. So if those drafts are kept on the share drive, not your personal notes on a draft. But when the committee gets to the point that it's creating drafts, that might be the final. Actually, I would save all your drafts on the SharePoint, and then it's up to really the city clerk to decide, is this subject to public disclosure or not?
Okay, thank you.
I just made your life harder. I'm sorry.
It's a more satisfying answer than the earlier one, so thank you.
Okay, to the line. Okay.
All right, so anybody else in the second round here? Otherwise, we'll go to Councilmember Rosno.
This may be a helpful clarification, or if it's correct. My recollection is that there is a public records exemption for, as you said, personal notes and a personal draft, but once it becomes shared with anyone else, that it's a public record.
The drafts exception to public records can be kind of complicated. So that's
So err
why
on the side of putting it on the shared drive and don't worry about
yeah,
it.
that's
Okay,
why I just
fair
went
enough.
that direction with Councilmember Mullenberg. Let the city clerk decide, no, these are just, personal notes, or this wasn't any part of a last draft or anything like that. Let the city clerk decide that. All you have to do is keep them on the shared drive. Your life is easy, his life is harder. Sorry, Matt.
All right. Thank you, Attorney Pratt. Okay, Councilmember Vice Chair Goldman.
I'm just on our agenda. It says possible updates to the governance manual. So I'm just wondering, are you bringing us any potential updates, or was that?
No, I'm not, and I should have talked to the city clerk more before the agenda went out. I think what that probably refers to is the next time you do a round of amendments or consider amendments to the gov manual. I would just like to put in some additional sections about the ad hoc committee not being subject to the OPMA rather than just having it in the introduction. Put it a little farther down also when we're talking about the committee, because it later on says all of these are subject to the OPMA and the ad hoc committee is in there. I should have changed that when you originally um, made these changes in January.
Okay.
All right, thank you. And for my part, you did answer my two scenarios, and I really appreciate that. You also answered the question that had been festering, which my fellow council members articulated much more cleanly about shared documents on the shared drive, and that also includes any kind of scheduling document. Because I think in the past we've done things like have like a Google Sheets or something about when are you available for whatever, and I think that is covered by the same thing you were just speaking of. Yeah.
Yeah, yes.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
All right.
All
Have a
right.
good rest of your meeting, you guys. Thanks.
All right. Take care. Good night. Okay. So, Councilor Rosner, I did not see your hand.
Yeah, so no, this is I waited until Attorney Pratt signed off, but before we moved on from the governance manual, a note that I had a conversation with some community members who wanted to weigh in on something at our previous meeting, and because they thought it was in the new business section, but it came up for final action at that meeting, and they didn't realize that that's what was going to happen because it was in new business. And the way that we reorganized the agenda when we were doing the governance manual, the intention was to signal clearly when something was going to move to final action, and in this scenario it didn't. And I just wonder if there's a way to flag items, and whether this is a governance. I'm thinking of this as a governance manual issue, but maybe it doesn't even have to rise to that level, in which case that's fine. But if it could be an asterisk or italics or something else to indicate when staff anticipates final action on some agenda item, just to make sure that the public is not confused about stuff like that.
Maybe putting it a little more concisely, that in the cover letters, there will often be a note as to whether the staff is requesting us to waive the three-touch rule. Maybe that could be part of the agenda itself. So you can like put an asterisk if staff is planning to request we waive the three-touch rule. That way the public is aware without having to dive into the agenda cover.
Yeah, that something like that is what I was thinking. The information is there. It's just people shouldn't have to dig for it.
Agreed. And yeah, I'm getting a nod from the city administrator, so I think that's something we'll do in the future. And
Thank you.
to those of you who are listening out there, we do apologize if we've caused any kind of confusion. We always try to make our product better, so thank you for your patience. All right, Councilmember Riddle.
Yeah, in a similar vein, I think just having more prominent introduction, discussion, action, whether that's on the cover sheet, but also very explicitly on um, the agenda, whether that's just putting it at the end of every item. It just helps, again, the community get a sense of what's happening and what stage it's in, if you will.
Agreed. All right, I'm getting a little that feedback thing again, so I'll try to speak away from the microphone. Sorry about that. All right, anything else anybody wants to say about this topic? Okay, we'll move on then. Second item, draft letter to King County Metro about proposed changes to bus route 372. I think this is Vice Chair Goldman.
Yeah, so we came up with a revised letter earlier today, so apologies for the short notice. I believe the city clerk put it into our agenda packet today, so if you've downloaded it today, you should have the more recent version. We tried to incorporate the feedback, so just very briefly summarizing the changes, explicitly talking about connections to UW and the lack of that connectivity, so putting that in. Also being more explicit about climate impacts and more people driving as a result of this. So I think those are really the core changes we made from the version 2 weeks ago.
All right, and I think it's a little bit more explicit about basically let's keep the 372 the way it is too, I think so.
Yeah. Also pointing out, County Council member Rod Dembowski put a budget proviso in that would ask Metro to study how changing the 372 affects ridership along the route. And so also just putting a note saying that we appreciate that and look forward to North Shore riders being part of that study.
Great. Thank you so much for all your work on this, you and the subcommittee that read this. Does anybody have any comments about the letter or any discussion about the next steps? I know there was some talk about reaching out to other cities. Councilmember Riddle.
Just a few very minor things. In the second paragraph, third line, our concern is when taking Metro and Sound Transit's changes in aggregate, service will suffer. I think maybe being more explicit of our community members will suffer. The service is there to support our community members versus service. Service is a very passive thing. And then as we move further down in that same paragraph, second line up from the bottom, we refer to North Shore, and I think we refer to North Shore in a couple other places. And in the parentheses, we said North Shore communities. So I think we should be consistent and call it North Shore communities so that there's a consistency there and not any confusion. And then some clarification perhaps on second page, second line, Central UW campus. I know what we're trying to say, but maybe there's again, a more explicit, like within the campus or into the campus versus obviously all the other services are on the periphery. So I don't know, or calling out Stevens Way, that's the main road that goes through the middle. Again, just being very specific.
Yeah, thank you for your feedback. I think we can getting feedback. My goal is for us to vote on this at the meeting this Thursday, the 25th. And then once we as a council have approved it, then we can more easily shop it to other cities or agencies because they know what they'll be signing on to. So hopefully all the feedback is kind of along those lines of, okay, let's just kind of wordsmith this bit. And so I think that we can turn around pretty fast. Councilmember Muhlenberg.
To Councilmember Riddle's point about addressing service to the campus, I would like to see the language just simplified to explicitly call for the restoration or the retention of the 372 route as it exists today, which not only maintains connectivity to the campus, but it maintains connectivity between the campuses, between Bothell and the main campus in Seattle.
Okay. Yeah, I think that seems reasonable to, I mean, I think the language is there, but yeah, to your point, making it more explicit and direct, keep the 372.
Thank you.
Councilmember Rosenau. Here,
Josh?
Hi, sorry about that. Yeah, just to respond quickly to some thoughts. The part of what we've been trying to balance is if it is to be signed on to by other people, we don't want to be, if we tie it too much just to LFP's needs, then it makes it less appealing to the rest of the service area. But I think, the idea of shifting from the focus on service to the focus on communities, plural even, because also it is about, we talk about the access to pharmacy and grocery services. And so making the connection not just to the community members who want to get someplace, but also people who are coming here to pay sales tax to us, which is nice also. And I think, again, in that sense, we tried to phrase that. I think there's a balance there of being flexible to Metro's needs. It may not be feasible for them to maintain the entire 372, but making clear what it is about it that we want to preserve. And as we've done, suggesting that just leaving it in place, at least for some amount of time to study the effect, is a good trade-off to make sure that we're not losing something through this process. And I will say that I've had some really encouraging conversations with folks in neighboring cities, including Seattle and Kenmore and Bothell and Woodinville, who all agree with the broad message of the letter and would be interested in signing on in one way or another. So we should figure out what we want that to look like. Is it cities? Can individuals, can business owners sign on? How are we gonna, what boundaries are we putting around that? And what deadline are we setting for it?
that's a good question. Pragmatically, Metro is making this change in August. So that's why I do feel a little bit of urgency. If we can approve it on Thursday, the sooner we approve it as a city, the sooner we can say, here's the letter we approved. Are you interested in signing on to other cities? Because I think the goal would be to get this to Metro sooner rather than later. I mean, just being totally blunt, they're making the change. But I think the optics that we're getting this letter before the changes happened, I think that looks better for us. So I don't know if there's a firm deadline. I think part of it's going to depend on if it's a city, when is there, how many meetings do they need to discuss it? If it's a nonprofit, what's their board process? But yeah, I think big picture, if we can approve it, then we can, either our city administrator can go kind of administrator to administrator, or if we have contacts at nonprofits, and just say, hey, do you think you can approve this sooner rather than later?
All right. Councilmember Riddle.
Okay, I lost my mouse. So taking what Councilmember Muhlenberg said, as we look at the line where we have our proposal and we have it would make sense. I think we just want to say critically, like this proposal would reinstate the 372 or some wordage like that. and just very firmly say that this proposal will reinstate that route as it is and today, and not duplicate Route 65. I just, again, whatever that language is, I think that I agree with Councilman Muhlenberg. We want to be very clear in that line. When it regards to the letter, I think the urgency is there. Vice Chair Goldman, I think you are spot on. We need to get it out to them and in their hands, but that doesn't mean that we can't resend the letter if we have more signees in, 3 months or whatnot. When people start actually seeing the service changes, we can have more signees, or we could have a different version of a similar letter. So I would say, let's get what we can out right now. Let's make it known, and then we can follow up if that turns into something that we would want to do.
And not this letter specifically, but at the Regional Transit Committee meeting last week, something I brought up was there can be such a long lag time that people forget about this. The open houses that discussed Route 372 were back in fall 2023, almost 3 years ago. And I imagine there's a bunch of people saying, oh, the routes didn't change. It's been 2.5 years. They're not going to change, only to find out in 2 months they're changing. So I do think there may be more people who were lulled into a false sense of security because, certain routes did change. A bunch of routes around Shoreline 148th Station, there's new routes like the 333 and the 365. Those changes were made. The 372s were just delayed. So yeah, I think this can be a living thing where we approve the letter, we can reach out to some of our immediate neighbors, see who is willing to sign on, by mid-July, let's say, and submit that to Metro. And then as more people are interested, more the merrier.
And as our mayor is often fond of saying, the perfect is the enemy of the good. So I completely agree with all of you. So it is scheduled for the for action on the 25th. So I think we'll have a chance to have a little bit updated letter by then, and it'll be in the packet for the regular business meeting on the 25th. All right. Any other comments? I think do we have Councilmember Saunders on the line? Okay. So not to put Councilmember Saunders on the spot, but do you have any thoughts on the 372 bus letter? She might not be fully on yet. Okay.
If she's on, she's not in the room with us.
Oh,
Oh, now she is.
okay. Gotcha. Okay. All right. So Councilmember Saunders, do you have any thoughts on the 372 bus letter before we move on from that? In the meantime, I will basically
Hi, sorry.
Oh, there you are.
Sorry, I just had a hard time getting in there. Yeah, no, I don't. I did have a chance to read that, and I agree with what the other council members have said about the issues and why we need to still have that service available. So I guess that's all I wanted to say, was that I agree with what everybody else wrote.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And just to add on to that, Councilmember Good, who could not be with us tonight, left a note saying that she is supporting this letter. So that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess we'll move on to the last topic, which is Resolution 26-2084, providing for a ballot measure to be submitted to the qualified electors of the city at the general election to be held on November 3rd, 2026, in conjunction with the state general election, of a proposition authorizing the city to levy regular property taxes in an amount in excess of the limitations provided in Chapter 8455 RCW for police and public safety services beginning in 2027. I think City Administrator Hill, that's yours.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Matt, did this go out to council, or are we gonna put? Okay. Sorry, we had a few last minute changes from King County today. It turns out that in November, the last week of November, when they send you the final worksheet, those don't tend to be the final numbers. So we found that out earlier today when Director Vaughn reached out. So I'll just go ahead and start, and we can walk through this. I'll just read the numbers out. So just changes since you've seen this the last time And the call out at the top is the November 3rd date for the election. And there's a little confusion at last meeting. In the third recital, what this says is the city's current levy rate is 0.66920. This is a slight change. I think it said 0.66919 in what was within the packet. That was that one decimal change that the county updated since we last got that. And then in this same recital, it calls out that the 0.66920 is 1.99486 per thousand less than what is statutorily authorized. What that is cities or taxing entities are allowed up to $3.60 maximum rate, and that's all rates combined. So for Lake Forest Park, you take the 366 minus our current rate, minus the fire district's rate, and minus the school rate. And that leaves you how much capacity is still within that rate. So the fire district's about 0.70. I'm not going to read all the decimals out. I didn't memorize them. And the school district is about 0.23. And so when you do the math, we're just shy of $2 less per thousand than is statutorily authorized. And the next recital is just an update to the current census estimation on 2026 population. Not population, sorry, getting my numbers. It's been a long day. This is, sorry, the amount that we received in additional taxes with the 1% in 2026 that council authorized back in November. No changes throughout the rest of this sheet. On the next sheet, page 2 of 6, the third recital down, which has been highlighted, that is something that I threw in there for your consideration. Just wanted to recognize the fact that while in the first several recitals, we talk about the budget cuts that council did, the amount that the city relied on in one-time funding in the second recital on this page, we did have to go back and increase the budget because of ongoing costs continuing to raise. I didn't think we should get into the minutia of how many dollars, but just recognizing the fact it's on the record of the 2 times that council's had to amend the budget, just to compensate for that. One being the mid-buy and one being the budget amendment that you're considering currently. Down towards the bottom, third paragraph from the bottom, the lid lift would raise approximately or increase approximately $1,247,153 with a 0.22 per thousand, which raises your rate to 0.88920 per thousand in 2027, and then calls out the 28 through 32, you would realize CPI. That's not set in stone. Council could choose not to take CPI in any of those years, but it is an option with the way that the ballot language is done. The next recital then tells how the 1.2 million in additional levy funds was calculated, and this is something that we heard in the last effort. We calculated this based off of a citywide 2027 assessed value. So we took the 2026, which we know the value today, and assumed 6%. You'll remember that from your budget calculators. We walked through that process. I'll just finish going through these and then we can back up for any questions. On the next page, second paragraph, just changing the date to November 3rd. Section 3 calls out the 22 cents per thousand. Section 4, the highlighted maintaining service levels of public safety services. That was a call out from a council member, thought was important to recognize within this resolution that we're not adding police officers. This is to maintain the services we have today. We're not adding prosecuting attorneys. We're not adding public defender, et cetera. This is to maintain what we have today. Section 6 on the same page just calls out the November 3rd general election. And then on page 4, which is the last page where there were changes, just updating the 0.88920 per thousand. That is what the levy rate would be, maximum levy rate would be if the ballot measure were to pass.
and then calling out the August 4th deadline for the clerk's office to get all this to the county. So with that, which questions have you got?
Council, do you have any questions? I see Councilmember Muhlenberg, then Councilmember Riddle.
Yes, City Administrator Hill, if you could go back up to the whereas clauses where you talked about the $1.99, 199 point something, something, something. That's the one. I just wanted to parrot back what I heard you say, but I want to say it in simpler terms that maybe our constituents would understand, which is what I hear you saying is the maximum levy amount we could ask for under current state rules is $1.99.486.
So
And that is a statutorily set cap. And in fact, just 3 days ago, based on what we thought were the end numbers, that number was $2.66. So whatever shifted, other levying agencies have taken up some of the available space for additional levy dollars.
yeah, so sorry, the 266 that was in the draft that was sent out was an incorrect number. The math wasn't done. So the maximum statutory rate for the city of Lake Forest Park, we'll just use us as the example, is $3.60. That is the maximum of all entities within Lake Forest Park, all taxing entities. So that is the city, that is the school district, and that is the fire district. The current levy rates against that 360 leave us $1.99,486 per thousand. So we're just under $2 below the maximum amount. And so this 199 could change based on the levy rate that the city puts forward, the levy rate that the fire district or the school district puts forward. And so that number will always be in fluctuation. And that will change over time as levy rates may change through the following years should the levy pass when you take inflation. But no, our maximum is not 199. We are 199 below what we could. So if you take 199 plus say 0.66, that would be our maximum levy against the 360. When you back out the 0.70 that the fire district is taking and the approximately 0.23 that the school district is taking. Clear as mud. I can make a slide for Thursday night.
No, I think we were both saying the same thing in a different way. If we
Okay.
were to, there is headspace left for taxing in our area of $1.99,486.
Correct.
Yes, thank
Okay.
you.
All right, Councilmember Riddle.
Thank you. A few comments. One of the things that I think we may want to highlight is the costs have risen across the board, but we are specifically looking at public safety because it has risen much faster and higher than the other areas. Because people asking, why public safety? Well, because it has like sort of an outsized impact because of how much it increased in relation to the other costs that are increasing everywhere. And again, that's not because we added new services, it's simply because those costs went up. So I don't know if there's a good whereas for that. I was thinking, whereas costs have risen across all departments, exceeding the city's ability to increase revenue or something along those lines. And then the next one would be the cost of providing public safety is increased significantly. Maybe that could be adjusted, increase significantly beyond, other departments or something. Just trying to kind of give a sense as to like why we're focusing on public safety a little bit.
So I'm getting feedback now. To that point, I wonder if the fifth recital on the first page kind of gets to that with the 24% increase in inflation over time. I would have to check with City Attorney Pratt because while this isn't the ballot language, there is a single subject rule. And I would hate to start mixing. We are truly looking at our biggest driver of cost for the city is public safety.
Mhm.
And granted, everything else has gone up in price. I think everybody knows that. You buy gas, you buy food, you know that it's gone up. But I don't know if that fifth recital does that for you, but I would have to check with the city attorney just to avoid getting in trouble with that single subject rule.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I think it just in a way, it just makes it more, people understand more why we targeted specifically the public safety.
Are you okay?
I have one more.
Oh,
Well, I have a
okay.
couple more, right? Can I do one more, or should you move on?
Actually, since Josh just had his hand up, let's let him go first. Okay. All right. Councilmember Rosano.
I'm happy, Councilmember Riddle, if you want to go ahead, I'm happy to come after.
Go ahead, Councilmember.
Okay.
Rosano, that is.
I just have a question or a comment about ensuring that we are tracking these dollars separately, because I know we will. And they, so there's a clear communication as to how it's being spent.
So we've got that. We did that on the website last go around. It was something that was not meant to be within the resolution. In fact, I think it was the county who recommended the removal of that language last time through. But yes, we will definitely, and several cities out there are doing the same thing as a practice, is doing an annual report of the actual revenue that generated. Because you remember at this point in time, we're only estimating the revenue that it would generate, and then showing how that is being spent. That is certainly something that we will do. But my recollection from last time around, it was not appropriate in the resolution.
It, possibly if we were to reiterate how we have transparent budgeting already, would that maybe be something that could fit in there? Otherwise, you're right, we communicate in other ways. I just think, looking at the resolution later, having it clearly spelled out that we will be tracking this separately, because that's what a lot of people, the fungibility and stuff like that. I think I would love for there to be something that gives folks confidence that we're tracking it separately will always be used for public safety. So if there's any way we can do that legally, I'd appreciate it.
So if you remember, there is no fungibility. If we call out what this pays for in this language section 4 on page 3, those are the only items that these levied dollars can be used to pay for. And so that's it. There is no fungibility beyond that.
Could we
Okay.
say shall be used and tracked exclusively for maintaining service levels, implying that there's something that, again, this is what I heard last year. I'm just trying to make sure we're very clear about it. I think exclusively does the right thing. I'm just curious if there's a stronger language that would be appropriate, and I will leave it at that.
All right. So, Councilmember Rosano, you've been very patient.
I guess I had two questions. One of them was here on section 4, so I'll start there so you don't have to scroll. I'm thinking about right now we just had a conversation about prosecution services, and it's the same service levels, but just the rate changed. So that would fall within this maintaining services. But there was the mandate about the amount of public defense that had to be available. Would something like that, if there are mandates that come down from the state that require additional services of some sort, would we consider that to still fall within maintaining service levels, or do we not mind that it is excluded, or do we want to wordsmith this at all to cover that?
So good eye, because City Attorney Pratt and I had a similar discussion about public defense. If we know public defense is going to continue to rise in cost because the amount each public defender can represent in a year is going to go down over the next 10 years. We feel good in that sense. As far as anticipating what we don't know, and I don't think you could put that into ballot language in this resolution.
Yeah, there's no way to say maintaining service levels or responding to state mandates or something like that. That gets
to be a mouthful.
Oops, go ahead. Sorry.
And then the other question was back on the question that Councilmember Mullenberg had flagged about the taxation. I know one of the conversations that we've had in this process before was all of the others at the table for that total tax burden on the individual taxpayer. And that, the 67, almost the just under 67 cents per thousand that we're talking about here would amount to something like 8% of that total tax bite. I wonder if we want to say that in some, like, put that other number, and to say, the city's regular tax levy rate is this, on top of school, county, fire, just so that people can see, okay, this is actually, and people have voted for all of this. None of these are, other than the state portion, all of this is stuff that people chose to take on as services that they want to pay for through property taxation. Is there a way to include that shows that that 1.99 ... is not just for the city to potentially tap, it's across all of those different purposes.
So two things to that point, council member. That is information that we've provided on the website, something that we have there today. We're also cautioned today by the county that our resolution is already far more wordy, and they feel is on the verge of becoming confusing if we keep adding information to it. So they were advising that it pretty much stay in the rate that it is. I think when you start trying to explain tax structure and portions of that $1.99 in a resolution, I'm not sure how well that's going to carry without the graphics and things that we have on the website that help explain that.
That makes sense. Thank you.
And on point, for the past couple of these that we've had already, this has always been a bone of contention, but it is wording that is required by the county. Unfortunately, it is in that weird way where it's basically less than a certain cap and that kind of stuff. We just have to live with it, and we're hoping that our supplemental materials explain exactly, as Councilmember Muhlenberg was pointing out, how basically that number was arrived at, and that will have to suffice. Okay, so I think we have Councilmember or Vice Chair Goldman.
Yeah, so first addressing Councilmember Roseno's point about maintaining service levels. The way I interpret it, our current level of service for public defenders is anyone who comes through the municipal court is entitled to a public defender. And that is the level of service we want to maintain. How many public defenders that requires, how many hours, in my mind, is kind of irrelevant, because ultimately it's about the level of service we're providing. So I think the language is fine as is. I like on page 2, the third whereas that was added, because something we've heard from the public is, you need to make a smaller budget. The thing is, we can make a smaller budget, but if it is not a realistic budget, then it doesn't actually mean anything, because we'll have to fix it to make it realistic. So saying that, we can't just arbitrarily say it's a small budget. It has to match reality. And then math typo, if you go to the bottom of page 2, the last two whereases, when you say 1.2 million, you're effectively saying $1 trillion. So just delete the words million from those two whereases. But overall, I like this. I mean, if we need to shorten it, we could probably think of a couple of whereases to delete if the county wants it shorter. But overall, I think it's pretty much ready.
Yeah, no, they're okay with the length. They just said that they don't usually see them quite as explanatory. We've explained to them that our constituency expects as much detail as we can provide, as much transparency, and that's the balance we're trying to get with this resolution.
And to that point, I really do appreciate our constituency, which keeps us on our toes that way. It seems to imply something about other cities' constituencies, but not ours. All right, I have one comment to read from Councilmember Good, who couldn't be here tonight. I believe that this is her words. I believe that this is a necessary measure. I also believe that there has not been enough public outreach on the subject. In speaking with people, they have commented that either they were not aware or have not seen much in the way of asking for public comment. This may mean that there will be confusion around the messaging on this item if it is approved for the ballot measure. On that note, is it possible to track any public outreach that has occurred on the new levies so that there is a reference to refer to? So that's her comments. And I think we are, just to respond, yeah, there are the subcommittee of three that's working on public outreach. I think that's one of the parts that completes the circle, which is to say, we hold these events. I think there's a compendium of what have we heard kind of things that we will be bringing up in council as we roll out our events. City Administrator, did you have anything to add on the staff side?
No, I mean, I think we're very limited on staff, especially with our finance director leaving us in a week. Our police chief has retired. The chief and I were the face, and that's why, in the past I've recommended and requested that we, have the help of the council, which you've graciously already stepped up. There was a town hall, a couple council members at I think it was a plant sale, a council member over the weekend at Secret Gardens booths. So I think, there's an effort to start meeting people where they are. And I think that's going to be huge in getting that word out, because not a lot of people come to council meetings.
That is fair. Thank you very much, Councilmember Goldman.
Related, so the ad hoc subcommittee, I think that's council members Good, Muhlenberg, and Rosenau. Is that correct? The ad hoc committee on kind of public outreach?
Correct.
Is your subcommittee kind of at the point where are you ready to kind of bring it to the full council, kind of a roadmap for coffees with the council?
By Thursday, only because of personal schedule, that'll be difficult to get done, Councilmember Goldman. Josh, and I know Paul is not here. I don't know if either of you are able to summarize the work that we've done and the point of view that we've come to, but I apologize. I can't meet that timeline.
I can summarize very briefly. I've had serial meetings with Matt and Paula, but I don't think all three of us have been able to find a time to sit down just because of all of those issues. But I think there is a broad sense of what we're trying to achieve, and I can probably circulate a memo that is sort of I've shown to those two as what I think of as a roadmap, and we can put that up for discussion and kick it around in terms of. I think for me, what I would like to think about is what materials we would like to, if we're doing tabling or other events, what we'd like to be able to share with people, if we're going to, how we're going to set up a website for people to request a meeting, or if there are other ways that we want to advertise these, if there are fixed places that we want to go. I would find it helpful to have, a yard sign or other things like that to be able to point people to, or a QR code. But I think that's the very broad overview.
So just kind of being pragmatic about it, after the 25th, our next meeting, there's a work session on Thursday, July 9th. Do you think your subcommittee would be ready to present on the 9th? Because I do think that would go a long way to addressing the community's feedback, is if at our next the next meeting after, we could come to them and say, and here is our plan to have detailed coffees or whatever it may be.
Yeah, if I may, given the feedback that Councilmember Rosenau just provided, here is the takeaway that I have from the committee conversations. The ability of the city to talk about the levy after we pass the resolution, or us in our individual official capacities after we pass the resolution, is limited. Our role is to listen to our constituency, not to advocate for or against in our official positions as council members. So my takeaway from the committee meetings has been hosting regular coffees for the council or other community outreach is something that we absolutely should do. Although conversations with abutting cities has indicated that participation in those events has been limited in their experiences, it is difficult to reach your population through those channels. Anything that we might strive to do to organize specifically around the levy should be constrained to soliciting feedback from the community through town halls, community meetings, or other locations where we can hear, but is not a place where in our official capacity we should be talking about the merits of or our perspective on whether or not this should be voted for or voted against by the constituents. Any advocacy, thank you, Phil, you can fill in a minute. Any advocacy that we do want to do can certainly be done in our roles as individual community members who are talking to our neighbors and talking to our community. And any work that we do individually to go have those conversations is on us to go do that work and not official action of the council. City Administrator Hill, thank you for your patience.
No, wow, you're absolutely right. I'm going to find the distance from the microphone I need to be. Just remember that you can talk about the facts, about how much it would raise, what it would pay for, but you're absolutely right. No advocacy unless it's one-on-one as an individual council member. No, well, not as a council member, as a member of the public, of the voting public of the city of Lake Forest Park.
And we can certainly, as I understand it, talk about the state of the budget and the conversations that we're having about the biennial budget, the overall state of the city's budget, and people can draw whatever conclusions they make from that. Is that correct?
All right. And Councilmember Muhlenberg, is your hand still up? Okay, great.
It is, yes. I just wanted to specifically address the comments, the written comments we had about feedback from the community. I think it's also important to stress how public and open we are as a council. We have budget committee meetings where we've been talking about this topic for months and months. We've had, I believe, only 3 community members show up at those particular committee meetings, even though they are advertised, promoted, and published on the website. That is the primary channel to provide feedback. That is direct access to your council members as we are talking about the budget. I appreciate the comment that we have an outreach to the community to get even more feedback. I think that is tremendously important as we enter this journey of trying to get this levy to fund critical services for our community passed so that we can continue to operate in the manner we've been operating. It is critical and important for us to continue to emphasize all of the opportunities that our community has to come address the council and provide that feedback, which includes the budget committee meeting, which includes the council meetings, which includes the committee of the whole, which includes any number of other forums that we have. And I vastly respect the desire that we have as a council to get out to our community and to do coffees. I appreciate that we want to do that. I encourage us to do that. I want to observe that when that has happened in the cities that surround us, almost no community members show up to those events either. So that is us taking our own personal time for which we are not compensated to go out and collect that feedback in a forum that is additional to all of the forums that we already provide to get that feedback. Our community can talk to us anytime they want. They have all kinds of channels to get to us. I make my own personal phone number publicly available everywhere I can so that my community can pick up that phone and call me. I'm going to go sit on the corner of my street and talk to community members that are walking to the farmers market on Sundays because I happen to know that they pass by my house. That's something I'm going to do personally. I just, again, am emphasizing there are all kinds of forums that we already provide. And while I respect the feedback that we could solicit more feedback from our community, every additional place we do that is additional personal time that we are contributing to make that possible on top of the minimum of 7 meetings per month that create, or maybe that's an exaggeration, maybe it's only 4 meetings per month that create an opportunity for our community to come talk to us directly already.
Thank you for your passion, council member. Anybody else have a comment? All right. Well, I mean, I wanted to mention to Councilmember Riddle that we do now have a sandwich board that says "Ask a Council Member." So any of you are welcome to use that. It's sitting down by the receptionist desk. I was able to use it this past week at the Secret Gardens tour plant sale, and Deputy Mayor Mork of Shoreline and I sat for about an hour and a half in the morning at the sale. She had a harder, I was mentioning to her, she had a harder time because they have the pool levy coming, well, pool, what is it called? Bond,
Arts.
yes, coming
Yeah.
up basically. But for both of us, nobody talked about the potential levy or the bond for that matter. They were much more interested in talking to us about what's happening on Ballinger and are the cities cooperating on a trail connector between the Burke Gilman and the interurban, those kind of more, I guess what you might call day-to-day kind of things. So I think to Councilmember Good's point, you do make a good point. We do need to do public outreach, but we're not going to get very many people interested until it really does show up on their doorstep in the form of what even, let's say, the county's what is that called? The voters got. Yeah, voters pamphlet. So yeah, we'll get some questions up until then. We'll get a few very, very passionate people coming to our council meetings, but we really can't basically get the attention that, in the way that this probably needed at this point, just because basically it's not really on a lot of people's radars to talk about. So we shouldn't beat ourselves up about that. All right. So any other comments on the levy lift? Okay. All right. Well, go.
Oh,
Sorry.
yeah.
Yeah,
What,
Councilmember Rose now. Go ahead.
one thing when Councilmember Good and I were talking, we discussed the possibility of on the city property next to the farmers market on Sundays, whether it would be possible to set up a table there and council members could take a shift, no more than three of us at once, but doing similar to what you did on Saturday, Tracy. And I assume that we can do that. It's our city property, but I don't know if there are any reasons that would be a problem.
Let me speak with City Attorney Pratt. The way that levies are is it can't be anything that you don't do normally. And so if, there are points in time when we're at the farmer's market, we've had tables, it's once or twice during the summer. If it's every week, that might raise to another level that we're going to have her weigh in on. So let me find out for you.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be
If it's not levy
levy
specific, if it's
yeah.
just come and talk to your council member about anything, and you don't have any paperwork or anything about the levy, just you're there to answer factual questions and you should be fine. But
I think that's what we were talking about. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, so it sounds like we've got a sandwich board and there's probably a table around. So if we set up a sign up sheet, we can get that rolling.
All right, Councilmember Muhlenberg.
I know Attorney Pratt has already left for the night, but the sandwich board raises a question for me, which is if we are out in an informal capacity soliciting feedback from our constituents, it would appear to me that the presence of a sign that said talk to a council member would imply that we're acting in our official capacity. And if we want to be out discussing the levy with our neighbors in our community in our role as members of that community, we probably don't want to have that sandwich board with us because that implies something counter to what we're trying to do when we're having those conversations. Is that reasonable? And maybe City Administrator Hill, you could clarify that with our attorney.
Absolutely. And to this point in time, it's not a problem because you haven't passed the resolution. So we'll see if that is a trigger point.
Okay, anybody else? Councilmember Riddle.
Yeah, just as a clarification for me, anytime I have any city, my badge, anything that, and then I'm in my capacity as a council member, I always err on the side of caution and make sure if I'm doing anything else that I'm not wearing my badge and so forth. So, it's which hat do you have on, and you have to be very clear. And you can't really switch, at the same time, it's the same meeting. So you just have to pick one and go with it. But yeah, it is, if we have the sandwich board, that would be for me a very distinct, I am in my council member role, and then I have to stick to factual items and that type of thing.
All right, Councilmember Saunders, did you have a comment?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I don't think I see anybody else's hands up. So I think that just means that we move straight to adjourn. So we will see you on Thursday night for our regular business meeting. Take care, y'all.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you. Take
All right,
care.
good night.
Thank you all.
Good night. Thank you.